So we open with the now iconic. What a weird and brutal and attention-grabbing way to open a film. It's so different. I worked in a cinema when this movie came out, and I would just go into the beginning of the film again and again just to hear that through the sound system. It's so big and epic and weird. I absolutely love it, and I hope that Messiah opens the exact same way. We then fade into Princess Irulan giving her historical records here, just like before most chapters in the book. I think that Florence Pugh is an absolutely brilliant Princess Irulan here. She manages to balance sophisticated and educated and highborn with this edge and this punk rock element, this determinism and intellect. She's such a great actor. If you watch Midsummer, she really shines in that role, and I think she balances these two elements of Princess Irulan perfectly here.
Since that night, my father has not been the same. Nor have I.
This opening prologue does well to reintroduce audiences to these political machinations, to these feuding feudal houses and this betrayal and violence. I absolutely love when Dune Part 2 just fades in with Hans Zimmer's stirring strings. For so long, this film wasn't greenlit, it was only a possibility, and we might have only got the first part of half of this story, and I just want to say that I'm grateful and incredibly happy that this story is finally complete, kind of. Did he do Messiah? The color palette here in this first opening action sequence is so beautiful. These deep, dark oranges and hard blacks just jump off the screen. There are so many frames here that could be paintings. We get this subtle, suspenseful score by Zimmer, and all the characters are like frantically running around in this state of erratic fear. It's very suspenseful and immersive.
What song?
Oh my god, this moment where the Harkonnens climb this mountain. Zimmer's score is so industrial and dark and grindy and brutal, yet beautiful somehow. It's all framed so magnificently. I think a lot of people think of film as a money-making means sometimes, as a product to be sold to consumers, but at its highest level, film is an art form, and that is captivated here, not just in the cinematography or the lighting, but in the sound design and the score and the editing and the pacing and the framing. It's all absolutely beautiful. The beauty and the brutality is melting my brain! The moment where Chani bats away the hand of this dying Harkonnen as she sucks all the water out of him is so dark. We see this mentality of these desert people here is such a hard way of living that it transforms you into these people that are just calloused all over, and it really does a great job of emphasizing the mentality of these hardened desert folk.
Filthy water. It's full of chemicals.
I love the culture shock and genuine peril that Jessica and Paul are in when they enter Sietch Tabor for the first time. There's this angry mob verbally accosting them, but deeper and darker than that, there's these religious zealots within this mob that are praising and bowing down to Paul, saying Mahdi and Lisan al-Gaib. The score really does a great job here of conveying the danger in these beliefs and in these believers. Ripped straight from the pages of the book, Paul has this psychedelic vision now that he's exposed to all this spice in his new diet. He sees his father's skull built into a shrine in the stone. All these lens flares here that are practical, and the ethereal music just give this psychedelic vision this great depth and beauty. This bizarre religious rite is then carried out as Jessica drinks the water of life in order to become the new Reverend Mother for the Fremen. Zimmer uses these dissident voices in this weird staccato here to emphasize the tension and suspense of this incredibly crazy moment. They're like, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha. It's very high and stirring and builds in intensity and amplitude and pitch, just raising the tension and suspense. The world building here feels very real and grounded. It reminds me of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, just with the costumes and the set design and the acting. It all conveys this rich, real feeling culture, and it's very enveloping and incredibly fascinating. The scene then spirals into madness as Jessica consumes this drug and starts to convulse on the floor. The synths and the score just go mad, and we see Ilea's embryo get engulfed by this blue wave with these deep, resonant synths just driving home the horror. All the witches start to react to the abomination that they've just created. And the idea of this awareness being brought onto this embryo is so weird and interesting. We see the eye open up and it just perfectly conveys this awakening of this abomination. In the book, whenever a character consumes an excessive amount of spice, they have this massive psychedelic reaction, and we get all the insights into their brain as it changes and flows through this madness. I imagine these moments while reading the book as a lot more crazy and psychedelic, but they're more grounded here. They still convey the right amount of narrative weight, but in the book there's a lot more crazy and insaneness which could be captured through visuals. In the book, Jessica consumes the spice and she actively and consciously changes the molecule here from a poison to a psychoactive substance, and after she changes it, everybody is in this kind of ceremony and they all consume this psychedelic and they have this Fremen spice orgy here. Paul and Chani are getting all intimate and weird and sexual, and Chani has a visage of their future baby while all this is happening, and it's so incredibly crazy and weird and insane in the novel. If you haven't read the novel and you're a fan of these movies, you need to. You need to. Javier Bardem does an absolutely brilliant job as Stilgar here. We've barely seen him in part 1, and he becomes in part the comic relief for part 2. A thing that I never would have thought that would have worked, but somehow Javier Bardem's charisma makes it work. He's this devotee that is just thrown to the cause and is forced to believe. He only has his beliefs, and that's all that's motivating him here, and it becomes comical looking from the outside to see how devoted he is and just how much this prophecy has consumed every ounce of his psyche. Denis adds these two divergent ideologies within these two Fremen factions here, and I think that actually adds a lot to the narrative. It creates tension and suspense and builds up Paul's archetypical hero journey more and creates more of a hurdle for him to overcome. None of these elements are necessarily very prominent in the book, but they're emphasized here. The Missionaria Protectivia was this device that the Bene Gesserit implanted into planets. So if you were stranded there, all these religious ideas that they had implanted and infiltrated and manipulated into the culture were at play, so you could utilize them to escape. It is all this weird fucking manipulation by these magic space witches here. There is no real prophet. It is all false. And I like the division between the North and the South, and the North's awareness here of the fact that they are just being manipulated by these Bene Gesserit witches.
Demonage! Shai-Hulud the Big.
O Magda ha Fremen!
I think everything that they did with Ilea in this film is great. The shots of her embryo slowly developing, the way she communicates with Jessica. They don't cut her out of this story. She kind of, in a way, plays a bigger part in the book, certainly a more active part. There's a larger time span and she's born and she does more stuff here. But I thought that every element that she was in the film was really weird and odd and just different. You look at those shots of her embryo and her communication and her awareness and awakening. It's super odd and crazy.
She talks to me.
Jessica takes a far more harder edge in this film than she does in the book. She starts to push Paul aggressively towards becoming the Lisan al-Gaib and controlling the weaker Fremen. In the book, she's more supportive of him and is there to help him. But here in the film, after drinking the water of life, she really takes a hard turn and she's just determined to push this prophecy and make her son become this Mahdi, this religious leader, this messiah, this false messiah, if you will. It's kind of great and it helps to push the narrative further and faster.
We must convert the non-believers one by one.
Using Lawrence of Arabia as a massive inspiration for this film, Denis filmed in Jordan and Abu Dhabi in real deserts on real dunes, using real sunlight to light these shots. It looks inherently different from blue screen and digital backdrops. Your eye can tell. I know that every film is like that now, but it does pull you out a bit, and seeing real light and real sand and real nature environments here, it conveys something different. It conveys this idea of man and nature and our relationship far better, which is a massive element of the narrative here. It's just so crazy and beautiful and insane, and I absolutely love it, and it'll stay ageless. It's not gonna age or degrade like CGI heavy films of the modern age. It will stay timeless to a degree, like Lawrence of Arabia, which was a heavy and massive inspiration for Frank Herbert while writing the book. So it all comes full circle. Lawrence of Arabia is created. It inspires Frank Herbert to write the novel. That inspires George Lucas to write Star Wars. Danny then reads Dune and is heavily inspired by that and watches Lawrence of Arabia, one of the greatest films of all time, which heavily inspires his film career. And all that is just shoved into this machination here, and it's brilliant and beautiful. Film is an inherently different medium to a novel, and here we see more emphasis on these action set pieces. In the book, a lot of the exploration is in people's minds. It's the deep psychology of everything that's happening with religion and drugs and ecology and politics and manipulation. But here in this visual medium with audio elements, action scenes lend themselves a lot more. In the book, a lot of the action scenes are just explained how they're set up, and then they're explained how they're resolved. We don't really get a first-person perspective in a lot of battles, seeing the characters go through the motions. So it was a smart move here to lean more into these action elements. Denny references film as a war movie in a lot of ways, and the action sequences are so well executed. The scale of these machines, the sound design, the score, the movement and like frantic cutting in the editing that just creates pace. It's not too choppy and crazy, but it's not too slow. It has the right energy and rhythm that a film should. It's an incredibly smart element, and it really showcases the difference between cinema and books. They're completely different mediums. I think that Paul and Chani's romance here works. I think there's some charisma between the two actors, and Denny filmed this in golden hour, which is like a certain window of the sun setting here, so they only had an hour to film each day. It really pushes forward this kind of 50 sense of old school romance, and all that is capped by Hans Zimmer's incredibly beautiful and haunting and longing yet hopeful score here. This theme played on the flute is absolutely brilliant, and I think that alone, plus the visions of them in this golden hour, is able to sell this romance. To me, it feels like an old school 50s romance. The looming war of the jihad, this holy crusade that is uninevitable, that Paul is speeding towards and is trying so desperately to avoid, is well conveyed to the audience here. Paul is a sympathetic character because he's stuck in this, machine that he can't get out of. Even if he just wanders into the desert, all the pieces are still in place and this jihad is still going to transpire. But he's also incredibly tyrannical and evil because he ultimately does fall into this one visage that he finds and tries to do well, but still leads to the genocide and the control of billions.
Millions and millions of people starving to death because of me.
The timeline in this film is far more compressed than in the book. This period takes the place over 2 to 3 years in the novel, and here it's about 7 to 8 months. I think enough scenes are shown here to make us believe that this archetypical hero's journey is possible and that all these moving elements are in place and could manifest that quickly. And one of the most compelling elements of that journey is this now iconic and incredibly crazy Fremen rite of passage, the riding of Shai-Hulud. We have all these beautiful shots of the landscape of these massive real-life dunes with Paul framed on them like a little ant. It really conveys the scale of what's about to happen and the impact of the environment. It's very slow here and suspenseful. Danny referenced Jaws, when you don't get to see this monster, when it's just quiet and we just see our characters just on the precipice of this moment, just trying to live through it. And you can really feel that here. The movie slows down and becomes incredibly quiet and tense and suspenseful as we just kind of hear the worm off in the distance. There's absolutely no score, and then the suspense starts to swell and build, and the sound design really takes center stage here. These great elements sound like buildings bending and breaking in the wind as the worm just collides with this massive dune. We have all these perspectives of Paul, and we can hear him breathing and calming himself down. And then it'll cut to wide shots, just reinforcing the crazy scale here. It's all sold by the sound design and the pacing. They used Dune that they manufactured and then had trucks pull pieces of machinery out so the Dune would collapse, and we actually get a stuntman diving into it here. It's this great combination of practical effects and CGI just executed at the highest level. So we're never engulfed by digital effects. There's never an entire frame 100% composed of digital effects. It's this combining of real natural landscapes and sunlight with digital extensions, and sold by the brilliant and amazing sound design and the cinematography. We see Paul survive this insane cascade of sand and debris as he struggles to find himself, losing gravity on this momentous monster as it surges in the sand, and then completely absent of score so far. Just holding back on the music makes it so much more impactful when it starts to kick in here. It just crescendos to such a high watermark. It's insane. This incredibly insane vocalization by this female here, by these stirring and just swarming synths and strings. It just uplifts you to such a high level and perfectly conveys the religious and social weight of this moment. Paul is now a Fremen, but more than that, he's fulfilling the prophecy, and that's not a good thing. And we see all that in the reactions from Stilgar and Chani, who's disappointed. It's such a great sequence, which is so compelling and immersive, but also conveys so many different elements. I love the Beast Raban's character arc in this film. He's just a complete and utter failure. He's too dull and aggressive to properly combat the Fremen's hit and run tactics, and he just completely stumbles off his dominance hierarchy here and falls to the bottom of the ladder as Fade comes in and takes complete control. It's a brilliant performance by Dave Bautista here, and I think it's a lot harder to convey this vulnerable, broken, soft manner rather than just this aggressive monster, and he does both and balances both, and I just have to tip my hat to him here because he's gone further in his performance than just being the big heavy monster, the beast. He's now broken and sad and vulnerable and weak, and showing that and being able to convey that is a vast talent. So good job, Dave. Surely good job.
Kiss or die.
There's been some criticisms of Christopher Walken's portrayal of the Emperor Shaddam IV in this film. I think he does okay for the most part. I think some criticisms were that he seemed feeble and powerless, but I think that was supposed to be the case in a lot of sequences where he's kind of talking back and forth with his daughter, and his daughter has a far deeper understanding of the political and social and psychological mechanisms at play, while he's alienated from the system and kind of out of touch. I think his accent is a bit weird and it does take me out. I mean, it's always hard when there's such an iconic actor that you've watched your whole life and seen in a million roles, and then you see them in this far out crazy sci-fi film that should be set in a different world and feel completely alien. And he does feel like Christopher Walken, but I still think he does a good job, especially in the throne room at the end. I think he really shines in that sequence where he takes command and dresses down the Baron.
That's all we know.
More. Give me more.
He's a madman.
Mad?
All Fremen are mad.
That's all you know. Really?
We then get the introduction to what I believe is one of the more compelling antagonists of the last decade. Austin Butler just absolutely disappears in this psychopathic, weird, insane, intense role. His body language and his cadence and his voice and his energy is also dark and crazy and weird, but infinitely compelling. An absolutely brilliant performance by Austin here. Feeling very unique and different in the landscape of big Hollywood blockbusters, Giddy Prime here is filmed in ultraviolet light. They put a filter on their cameras to cut out all other light other than ultraviolet, and it gives it this weird, surreal, ghoulish element here to this planet. It's just incredibly risky to do this here. The studio was worried, but Greg Fraser, the cinematographer, and Denny were committed to this, and it absolutely works. It just becomes so iconic and different than anything that I've seen in cinema, especially large-scale, big sci-fi blockbusters. It's creative, and I think this film is that. That's what it really is. It's art executed at a very high level, but it's also like experimentation and risk and rolling the dice. It's experimenting with new sounds, with new instruments, with new visions, with new ideas. And that's what art is at the highest level. It's executing something new and different at a level that is emotionally engaging. Fade enters into the Colosseum, and his entrance is face melting with this burr of deep synths, and then it crescendos into this insane strings as he struts around the Colosseum here. Violence is very interesting in this film, and watching it, it was very interesting for me to try to analyze it and break it down. This film's only M or PG-13 if you're American, but it feels a lot darker, and it uses violence more by implying it than showing it. A lot of the stabbings are framed up so you don't see the knife penetrate, and there isn't a lot of blood and gore, but this film, it feels so dark and it feels so brutal. And a lot of that is because of the cinematography and the art design and the sound design and the score and the framing. There's battle in the Colosseum here. We don't really see Fade stab people. It's kind of out of frame or cut quick or not really shown, but the art design and the architecture and the cinematography, it just implies this atmosphere, and it goes to show that you don't need to show violence to convey a feeling, and the feeling conveyed here is of brutality and violence, even though we don't really see it in frame. It's great filmmaking. There are a lot of interesting elements in this story that aren't in the film, and a lot of interesting and fascinating characters that have cool and interesting moments that were filmed and then were cut out. And I think that pacing and structure of a narrative is far more important than showing interesting side characters. Thufir Howard has an incredibly interesting story in the novel. He's captured by the Harkonnens and is still loyal to the Atreides, and tries to serve the Atreides through the Harkonnens without being found out. There's also Lord Fenring, who has this psychological wall against prescience and is able to hide himself from Paul and help the Emperor and manipulate Paul through this element. But I think more importantly than those little interesting character moments is the pacing and the structure of the overall narrative. If you're sitting in the cinema watching this interesting side character do this fascinating, crazy thing, but you're bored because the pacing is slow, because the rhythm of the editing has pulled you out, then it doesn't really matter and it doesn't amount to anything. What's far more important is how a film flows. That's what keeps you compelled and immersed.
You fought well, Atreides.
Leah Seydoux plays Margot Fenring here, and I love this sequence where she manipulates and seduces Fade. I think that this far better conveys the idea of the voice than all the sequences of Jessica and Paul just yelling with a distortion on it. This subtle manipulation and this moment where she just sways him into her room. The architecture is so brutalist in the style of H.R. Giger, and it's just all incredibly crazy and insane yet beautiful.
Put your right hand in the box.
Denny doesn't introduce Fade until there's only an hour and a half left of this entire saga here. It's crazy. He introduces Fade at I think an hour and 11 minutes of the second film in the series, and then the next 17 minutes of the film is dedicated to setting him up, and it does well to set up everything we need to know. We get to know his character, his psychology, where he places in this political hierarchy, his movement to governor of Arrakis, his history, his tendencies, his combat. We need to know all these things about him, and it's conveyed so quickly in about a 16-minute time span, and it's one of my favorite moments in these two films, if not my favorite moment. It's just this whole sequence with Fade is brutal and insane, and it gives you all the information you need in such a short time span. It's insane, really. The beauty and the brutality is melting my brain! enters back into the narrative here, and Josh Brolin does a great job at playing this charismatic father figure that's dark and gritty and has this edge to him. He becomes in conflict with Paul's new family and the ideology that Paul's been creating here. There's this whole subplot in the book which doesn't go far and only really results in one scene where Paul thinks that Jessica is the betrayer and holds her at knife point and almost kills her. I understand why that's cut out. It doesn't eventuate into anything, but it's a fun character moment for Gurney. He then gifts Paul 92 nukes, this drug-addled guerrilla leader, this religious zealot, this kid who's on this revenge vendetta is then sped into the third act by giving him all these fucking atomics.
92 original Atreides family's atomic warheads. And that is power.
I love the sequence of this old Fremen woman drowning this baby Shai-Hulud in the water and extracting the water of life from it. It's so weird and creepy, and her body language, it's just so compelling to me. I think she has a background in martial arts, just the way she moves and the way she captures it. She has a certain control over her body that looks like some form of taekwondo or tai chi or some kind of discipline that she's familiar with very deeply in her very essence here. Paul then is just forced to move south, which is further pushing towards this genocide. He talks to Jameis, who is basically like, hey, your only path at this point is to move south, and not only that, but consume the water of life and take on this messianic role. It just moves all the pieces into the perfect place to execute this third act. Timothy Chalamet, for me, encapsulated the young, naive Paul in part one, and once again, I think he entirely encapsulates Paul here in part two. He goes through so many emotions in this film, from loss to fear to anticipation to horror to anger to this tyrannical dictator on this crazy rant. He has such a great range and perfectly encapsulated this further pushing of Paul down this arc to this insane messianic crazy dictator. He commands power and strength as well as vulnerability and sadness. It's a great performance from him in such an iconic role, and I feel like it's one of those roles that is this is what he's gonna be remembered for the rest of his life.
Across the storm city. Go south. Bring your people to safety.
Paul now consumes the water of life and survives it. This prophecy is fulfilled. Chani gets tied into this prophecy here, which is not part of the book. She provides her tears to wake him up. This desert springs that will reawaken the Mahdi, which ties her into the prophecy, which gains more substance to her character, which I like. Recently, Paul Stamets, a mycologist, has come out and talked about his experiences with Frank Herbert. It's obvious from reading the book, if you've ever tried psychedelics, that Frank Herbert had tried psychedelics and was aware of them and their effects and what can come about through use of them. But we really get confirmation of all that with Paul Stamets' interview. He talks about the water of life and its color, and if there's a certain type of mushroom that you pulp into a tea, it will turn blue. And Frank had all these moments, and it inspired Dune to a degree. He had visages of worms traveling through an apple while high on magic mushrooms, and that inspired the sandworms to a degree. And it's just so crazy and great that this fundamental element of society that's helped us develop and change has impacted this crazy, insane sci-fi novel, which is so massive and epic in the world of science fiction. And to have it confirmed by such a reliable source here is great. It only confirms what I already knew, but it's great that there's definite confirmation of Frank's experimentation with psychedelics.
This is none of your business.
Rabban Harkonnen himself killed my family. He gave me this scar to remember him by. This is all of my business.
Yeah, Gurney, you tell her. I think it adds a lot to Chani's character to create this ideological schism between her and Paul. It adds more depth and conflict and tension and suspense. There are some downfalls to it though, and I think a lot of viewers that aren't aware of the depth of the narrative and what's actually going on here might just conceive her as annoying and bitchy. There is a moment where Paul wakes up from his coma after drinking the water of life and she slaps him. That was a bit too far, I thought. I mean, imagine somebody waking up for a coma and you just slapping them in the face. I mean, give him a break. He's just been through this crazy physical transformation and is, you don't know what's happening to him. You're slapping him in the face. Either way, it does add more depth and interest to the character because in the books, Chani's there, but really she's just following Paul and supporting Paul, and it doesn't add a lot to her character and she doesn't do a lot proactively. She's just there to reassure him. So, they're expanding and building on her character, which is going to pay dividends when they get to Dune Messiah and they start to set up that love triangle there between Paul and Irulan and Chani and all the complexity and emotion and politics that go into that dynamic.
I came to wish you best of luck.
I'd wish you the same. But it seems you've won your battle.
The whole film just builds into the third act here as the tension and suspense just rises. All the pieces have been set up perfectly for this conflict, for this open war. The Emperor's ship comes down and just the image of it hovering over Arrakis, just aflame. I don't know the physics of that or why it's aflame or what is happening, but it's just such a striking and compelling image. Then we get Paul firing off the nukes and that massive, brilliant, crazy explosion. The scale of it is just crazy, and every little piece, every little character moment, the geography of it, the stakes of it, it's all been set up with such care and delicacy to have the most immersion and the most compelling experience here. A great grandmother of a storm bears down as these atomics explode and these worms emerge from the storm. This image will stay with me to my death. Just the visage of this momentous Leviathan swarming out of this storm with this deep synth burr. It's brilliant. The scale is there and the tension is there and the insanity is there and the oncoming battle is just, it's all well executed. Not even well executed, it's executed to such a brilliant and high degree. The Fedaykin fighting hand to hand with the Sardaukar, the worms crashing in, the atomics exploding. It's all great. A great third act. Paul then enters the throne room with all of the intensity at hand. Covered in blood and sand, he stabs the Baron in the neck. This is obviously a satisfying ending after part one and what the Baron brought down upon House Atreides and specifically Paul's father. In the book, the sequence was far different. After the time jump, Aliyah had grown into this little girl with high intellect that talks like an adult, but not just an adult with all the genetic memories of generations and generations of Bene Gesserit witches, and she uses the Atreides Gom Jabba to stab the Baron in the neck. In the book, the Baron didn't so much fly around on his weight suspensors, but they more just held his weight in place as he creepily tiptoed along, and these vast pieces of his flab were just held up in weird bunches. So she stabs him in the neck and he dies and he slumps, but he's still held in place by these weight suspensors, and he kind of slumps and falls while being held in his weight and all these weird bunches and just pushes back. I miss that. That's crazy. That's weird. That's insane and brilliant and amazing. It still exists. It's right here in the book. It's not like it's been deleted from history. I remember George R.R. Martin once, he was asked what he thought about all the changes that have been made to his books, and he was like, there have been no changes made to my books. My books are right here. They're the exact same books that I wrote in the 90s, and no version of them has changed them at all. And that is the same for Dune. That version of the story still exists in the book, and I do miss it. I do miss it. I know how hard it is to convey a 2-year-old killing the Baron or even talking without it being comical. So I understand the hurdle. If you look at David Lynch's Dune or the miniseries, yeah, Ilea is comical, and it's hard to convey that image in film. It's easy on the page, well, not easy obviously, but you know, you can convey that image on the page, but it's completely different in the visual medium. So I understand, and I think it's a great ending, but still, you know, I miss it. As a book reader, I do miss it because it's 4 times more batshit fucking crazy than what happens in the film.
Grandfather.
It's a very satisfying arc for Gurney here to be the one that kills the Beast of Raban. The scene felt a little bit rushed to me, but I can understand it being a theatrical film and how much they have to deal with. In the book, Paul just kind of wins the battle, and he comes in and one of the soldiers just says, oh, hey, yeah, the Beast of Raban is dead, by the way. We don't get to see that sequence transpire. So obviously here, this is a far more compelling and satisfying arc for Gurney, the one with the inclined scar, the one whose family was murdered, the one whose duke was murdered, to be the one to finally put the end to the Beast of Raban.
For my duke and my friends.
Once again, lack of gore and violence in frame doesn't mean a whole lot when you get such a striking and memorable image like the Baron's head covered in these big black ants crawling all over it. Such a brutal and confronting vision that isn't held back by rating, that is just able to be dark and intense and stirring and moving. Even though it's not gory or bloody or violent, it's great. Paul realizing his one visage, his one path through this minefield, demands for the Emperor's daughter's hand in marriage here. We see Chani's reaction, and this will lead into a whole further interesting dynamic between these 3 people here. He then calls out the Emperor, and the Emperor chooses a champion to defend him. I love how this final moment of this film, this final conflict, is so small scale. We've got such big, crazy, amazing action set pieces, and then it all comes down to a little knife fight between the brilliantly amazing Fade Ralpha and our archetypical anti-hero Paul. It's a great conceived battle here. The lighting, the sets, it's all shot beautifully. I think the rating does bring it down a little bit here and make it a bit confusing in this final sequence, which is all framed as kind of a mid shot showing Paul and Fade from belly button upwards, and we don't get to see the actual knives penetrations or where they are. Paul pulls out the knife that's already in him and stabs Fade, and we don't get to see any of that on screen, and I think that could be confusing for some people. I think they conveyed it the best they could, but yeah, I think that the rating in this specific moment does let the film down, and it would have been better if we just could have seen Paul pull the knife out on camera and stab Fade. That would have made it far more clear and would have made for a far more interesting and striking and memorable image. Fade now murdered, the Emperor captured, and the Lion Throne now a prize for Mardi. He commands his legions to take these houses to paradise. He's gonna carry out this jihad, this holy war, which will lead to the death of billions, and he's gonna pay for that through the blood of Fremen warriors. He's fully just fallen into everything that he said he wasn't gonna do. He said he wasn't gonna command the people, he wasn't gonna be the prophet, but he did it. And I mean, he's sympathetic because he kind of had to do it, but he's also a complete fucking monster and animal, as we'll further see developed in Dune Messiah. Chani is absolutely disgusted in the events that are transpiring, which is understandable, and we end on her here in the desert, just disgusted at what happened. It sets up Messiah. Oh my gosh! It sets up Messiah so much better than the first Dune did, which did a lot of work to kind of deconstruct the archetypical hero's journey and turn Paul into a tyrant and a dictator. This film here, with the awareness of what happens in Messiah, does a lot more to spend the time and an effort to set him up as a dictator and a tyrannical leader here in Dune, using Chani as that viewpoint of somebody who's not indoctrinated into this fundamental religious manipulation. So incredibly brilliant, crazy ending, mostly because I think I know what's going to happen, and I'm incredibly excited for Dune Messiah, which is now going to happen, unless something terrible happens, which is unpredictable, like Warner Brothers sees this golden goose and freaks out and wants to rush it into production and rushes Denis, or one of the main contributing parts of this artistic venture dies. God forbid, but I think there's a good chance that we're going to see Dune Messiah, and if it's executed to this level, this rivals the original Indiana Jones trilogy, the Star Wars trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy in my mind, all those great genre epic trilogies. This is up there, which is crazy because it's modern. In conclusion, I think specifically for me, this film hits a lot of boxes. I've been a rabid sci-fi fan my entire life. Dune, for me, is a very impactful book that I've read multiple times and listened to multiple times. Denis was a director that I absolutely loved and admired after his work on Blade Runner 2049. And cinema as an art form at its highest level is so compelling and interesting and fascinating to me. And all those elements just seem to combine and work and function. It's this crazy, intense, psychedelic, insane, weird story that's high concept sci-fi, and then just executed with an incredibly high budget at this incredibly high echelon of artistic ability, and executed perfectly. I mean, for me, and I know I'm biased, this isn't objectively, it's subjectively. For me, this is kind of the perfect film. It's the perfect film. But that's just me. I mean, how much more can I suck Dune Part 2's dick? Not much more. I think I'm about done. Yeah, the film's fucking great. I think it does everything it needs to do and more. What I thought was the highest level it could reach, it surpassed, which is crazy. Alright, thank you all for watching, and really help out if you like, subscribe, and in the comments tell me how I got all the facts wrong and how my opinion is null and void. Thank you, and good night.